experiments. Back then, in 1970s, you've made headlines by disguising yourself as an 80-year-old woman to better understand the aging element, hence why the gerontology part, which you've pioneered. What inspired you to take such bold and unusual steps? Were there any particular ideas that you were envisaging that would become very warm, hot in the future? Or what were some of the most surprising insights that you've gained as part of that experiment?
The call comes in later, and it's the executives, the CEO, saying, "My baby was just born without vision. We need you to come back." Sometimes it takes an earth-shattering event to make people in leadership roles do the right thing.
Hello, everyone. Today at the Future Skills podcast, myself, Nadia Barker, the host of this podcast, is very proud to welcome our guest, no other than Patricia Moore, who's an internationally renowned designer, who is a gerontologist and trailblazer in universal design. Named by ID Magazine as one of the 40 most socially conscious designers in the world, that is, not just anywhere locally, but in the world, she's perhaps best known for her groundbreaking empathy experiment in the late of 1970s. I don't know if anyone else has done what Patricia has done at that time, even later on, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in details, but she's also managed to disguise herself back then as an elderly woman to experience firsthand the challenges of aging in everyday environments. Patricia, welcome.
Thank you so much. So happy to be with you.
Likewise, and I'm so happy that we're having this conversation today. Patricia, before we dive in, we have a traditional question on our podcast, and that is, can you please describe yourself in 3 words of your choice?
Oh, the hardest thing for me to do, I have to tell you, as a child, I was raised never to talk about yourself, that it was considered rude. So I'm being very brave now. Let's see. I like to think I'm kind. I know I'm loyal, painfully loyal, and I'm definitely persistent.
Thank you. These are great choices. I can tell in terms of the persistency mark. Well, your experiment in the 1970s would tell us all about that, isn't it? Because according to the public sources, you've traveled across the USA territory, which is pretty vast, and you've encompassed over 200 locations on that mark just to be able to do your research and to do it properly. So that tells me a lot about persistency. In terms of your empathy experiments, back then in 1970s, you've made headlines by disguising yourself as an 80-year-old woman to better understand the aging element, hence why the gerontology part, which you've pioneered. What inspired you to take such bold and unusual steps? Were there any particular ideas that you were envisaging that would become very warm, hot in the future? Or what were some of the most surprising insights that you've gained as part of that experiment?
Well, I was twice blessed because I was raised in a household that included my grandparents. And of course, as a little child, you just knew the true meaning of a grandparent. You know, they were the ones that spoiled you rotten, countermanded whatever your parents said you must do. They would sneak you off and give you the piece of candy, so it was heaven on earth. And I adored my grandparents so much. And it wasn't, of course, as I say, something mindful, but as I was growing as a little one, I would start to see instances where my grandparents were having difficulties. And I heard the whispers of the adults in the room. Grandma was getting frail, and what should we do? And maybe it's time to speak to the doctor. And of course, little ones aren't supposed to be part of these conversations, but clearly I took it all in because so much of those early years inform everything I do still to this day. Even as I approach my 73rd birthday,
Oh, bless.
I'm feeling more and more, the glances from strangers and people wondering who you are and, being defined by age. So those were the things that really, I think, set the bedrock or the cornerstone of how I approached what then became a career path, a life path.
Thank you so much. And might I ask, on that note, what age were you that you had that awareness already that you need to somehow be part of the journey in terms of helping out the elderly?
Oh, I was preschool. So I would have been 3 and 4 when my mother would allow me to walk in our very small little neighborhood, mind you, to the neighbors' houses. And there were a number of elder women, widowed women, I would learn later. And they just delighted when Patty Ann came for a visit. And of course, again, Patty Ann enjoyed just sitting and chatting on the front porch and hearing them tell me their stories. And then, of course, it always meant going into the kitchen for a nice cold glass of milk and a cookie. So it was really just heaven. It was just nirvana. And I adored it. They were my first playmates. I'm the eldest. And so I didn't have any siblings yet. And I just recall all of those days and moments as being so precious.
I can still resonate with that feeling when they were the early days mentors. We were not used to refer to the word mentors back then, a few decades ago, but now it's such a strong, powerful word. Do you feel that at the time, being so close with the elderly and feeling that atmosphere at the time there, it has helped you better understand their needs and how you would then express that to the benefit of other generation that were aging?
Well, actually, I think at a very young age, I realized there's a distinction that still we have an erroneous assumption in design, in architecture, even in health and wellness and medicine, that you are meant to be frail, fragile, less at the end of our life journey. And the elder is somehow blamed for shortcomings and incapacity, when in fact, architecture, design, engineering is at fault. I remember clearly, as I said, as a preschooler, sitting at the kitchen table, helping my gran get dinner on the table. She was always giving me little tasks to keep me out of her hair, like divide the green beans into piles of 5. And so I was busy doing that very important task. And I saw her at the refrigerator and she went to pull the door open. And then I heard her cry. And she was in pain just with her arthritic hand trying to open the fridge. And I remember thinking, bad fridge, not poor arthritic grandmother. And sadly, the rest of the world was thinking, oh, poor arthritic grandmother. She's broken. It couldn't possibly be that appliance. So I entered my career with a staunch attitude that design was at fault, not our elders. And in fact, knowing that creative laziness or the malfunction of not understanding the consumer's needs properly was dooming them, damning them to a life that wasn't equitable and self-sustaining, and a life of autonomy and independence was something that turned me into a warrior princess very early on. I was the first and only female at Raymond Loewy's New York office, and to be working with the father of American product design, industrial design, was remarkable enough. But I just remember my very first meetings with all the gentlemen around the table just moaning and groaning when I would say, excuse me, if someone had arthritis, they wouldn't be able to operate that microwave. And that's when I first heard, Patty, we don't design for those people. And
Exactly.
that's the mantra that has defined my career. Why not?
Now that you're saying that exact phrase was also captured in Roman Krznarik's book as well, when he was talking about why do we need empathy as a movement even these days, not just a feeling. And he did highlight that element of yours when you literally just stood up in front of the entire industry, let's put it that way, because at the time it was very uncommon, is it not, to just refer to the needs of the elderly, because as you said yourself, the infrastructure was far not there. And would be curious to find out from yourself on that perspective. And on that note, do you feel that many have changed? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how far do we still need to go to be able to capture those needs as their best?
Well, there has been significant change in the terms of progress. Things have gotten so much better, both in in Europe and in the States in particular, we now have laws of standardization for design, just basic architecture and design, that make spaces more equitable, accessible, products more usable. But still, we neglect a large number of consumers and potentially half the planet's population with design of the littlest things that confound our daily lives. Like when you see someone with arthritis of their hand unable to open the jam jar just to put a little spread on their morning toast, it's heartbreaking to me. And industry accepts that. Industry says, well, yeah, we could probably do it differently, but why bother? So we still have so much work to do, and it is, as I say, very frustrating. So I have to, just sort of calmly bide my time, wait for the opportunity to sneak in that wisdom, if you will. Often I'll get a call from someone that had brought me in, a corporation that had brought me in before, and I share my beliefs with them and I leave, and then they do nothing. The call comes in later, and it's the executives, the CEO, saying, my baby was just born without vision. We need you to come back. Sometimes it takes an earth-shattering event to make people in leadership roles do the right thing. Eventually, if we bide our time, I always tell young designers, you don't have to win in this moment. Wait till tomorrow. There's always another chance. But you have to be aware change must happen. We've seen a lot of it, but we still have ageism, we have racism, we have religious intolerance, we have hate, we have wars. Design has so much work to do.
Do you think that from the perspective of, because you've mentioned the policymakers and the fact that there has been a change in that regard, do you think that there are still some major risks that need to be accounted for when it comes to changes that could be still done and improved in that area? And what do you think helps the demographic shift in order to help more of designers, businesses and policy makers to get aligned on what's needed in that area?
Well, I was recently in a boardroom and very young colleagues, and one young gentleman said, well, is there any consumer group we should be particularly aware of that you can tell us about today? And I said, well, I have a good one for you. It's nearly a third of the US population. And you saw everybody sitting up and, putting down their devices, really listening. Oh my goodness, we're all going to be rich. What is she going to tell us? And when I said it's people over the age of 65, and you saw their jaws literally drop. What are you saying? I said, people over the age of 65 represent nearly a third of the US population. And they are living in their own homes, which is a very dangerous thing as single people. I am one of them. So it's fun for me to be in a boardroom and say, I need you to design for me. Understand, your vision of what someone at 73 should look like is wrong. Let's correct it. And how are you going to design for me? What do I need? What do you think my greatest concerns are? And then we start chatting around the table. And of course, their initial guests are typically very, very wrong. And when I tell them, no, my greatest need on a daily basis is safety and security. I think about it all day long. What happens if I fall and hit my head? What happens if I slip in the shower and I'm unconscious? Who's going to find me? How long is it going to take? Will I become a statistic? Because that sadly is how so many elders are found dead in their own homes because there was no one there to save them when there's been an accident. And falls, of course, are the biggest fear as we grow older. And there should be so many wonderful products and designs that we could be utilizing. I remember 40 years ago at the University of Buffalo, New York, we were designing gyroscopic pants, and we were doing it for skiers so that if you had a fall on the slopes, you wouldn't break your hip. But of course, the project really was for elders. But we were going to the banks, we were going to the money changers and saying, this is a huge market, the sports industry. When someone takes a tumble, they don't want to, fall. So whether it was a football player or a skier or someone of that nature, they were very enthusiastic. And then when we started to show the importance for elders who take a fall in their garden or their home, they lost interest. And we're seeing the interest come back. So again, you have to just be patient, because here we are 4 decades later and we're returning to some of the same ideas.
I see where this is going, and when it comes to the trends and what might be most importantly needed to be captured when it comes to the needs of the elderly. But then again, to your point, these needs and the audience itself, even though it's quite sizable, as you said, it's the third of, so definitely the eyeballs need to be there. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to be considered as attractive, as sexy enough to be able to be put on a lovely banner, and to be able to attract as many, user experiences that could be. But it just doesn't seem to be there. Why do you think there's still that reticence in the mix?
Well, I'm smiling broadly because you hit that nail right on the head. It's because it's not sexy. It's because it's like, oh, you're talking about old people? If we were talking about, Travis and Taylor, everybody would be so excited. So I always say, well, you see how much Travis loves his mother. You see how much Taylor loves her parents. Why aren't we as excited as architects and designers and engineers to meet those same needs? So this is sadly the isms that infiltrate our lives, and they're very hard to eradicate, eliminate. We still have racism, even though we've tried so hard to fight it. We have laws, we have support networks, and then you have administrations who take away rights, and we start all over again. So sadly, the prejudice, the lack of inclusion is something that has always been a roadblock. But designers are inventive, and I think we're mischievous, and I think we're persistent, and I know we're able to get past the no's. Mr. Lowy always used to tell me, when a client says no, that's when you get busy. Because you have to convert them. You definitely have to convert them.
In terms of converting and convincing the right type of audience when it comes to signing that paper, if you were a young designer these days, what type of skills, qualities, competences even, do you think the younger designers would need to have these days in order to get those signature on the right type of initiatives?
Well, sadly, who would have thought the beautiful gift of a digital realm would have robbed our young people of a natural capacity for conversation? But sadly, I would say this is one of the weakest skill sets that I see with young designers, and I'll keep saying architects and engineers because I see us as creatives, as a family. The fact that they freeze when I come into their classroom to give a special visit, when we go around the table or around the room and I ask them to just stand and say a few things about themselves, and they have nothing to say because they're so used to just, doing it on a device. They've lost the skill of conversation. That's very dangerous. And if they're relying on AI to write their papers for their grades, also very dangerous. But it's one of the things I think in academia we have to look at very carefully to change how we're training. And I always remind a student that a client isn't going to say yes to your creative dream unless you can sell it. And that means you have to be a brilliant storyteller, and you have to be able to paint pictures with words, and AI can't do that. It's got to be live and in the moment. And certainly not all of us have the same level of capacity for doing that. That's why we work in teams. I like to remind them, I still draw freehand. I have clients all over the world that proudly have an illustration of the product or the project we worked on that I illustrated. And you see their their clients come in and say, my goodness, this is a real drawing. And they're so proud. Yes, Patty did that. So it tells you that the creative arts are essential, but CAD is not always the answer. I hire people to do the CAD rendering. I do the pencil sketch and the marker sketch and all these things. And when I have students come up to me and ooh and ah as they see the doodles I'm making during our lectures, and they can't do that anymore, that means we've got to change academia. We've got to go back to basics. In my book, I'm a dinosaur. Yes, I know some professors think so, but I'm pretty confident I'm right, because we distinguish ourselves in those meeting rooms. If I'm sitting there sketching as someone's describing some idea that they have, the whole table gets up and comes around to see what I've been drawing.
Absolutely.
And it's so much more impactful. It's so much more powerful. If I may, I'd like to share one of my tools, one of my tricks. I will go into a meeting with a client the first time, and staff will work with me, and we take away all of the iPads and laptops and smartphones, and we put a stack of newsprint in front of each place, and we hand everyone a box of 8 colors of Crayola crayons.
Love that.
And you see everyone, there's the person who gets so nervous and the person that is like, oh, I used to love my crayons. You get this plethora of reactions. And then I tell everybody, so let's pretend we're back in kindergarten, preschool.
Exactly.
And we're drawing. So no note taking with devices today. We're going to draw, write your questions down in crayons, use your favorite color. And you always have the one poor person who raises his hand and says, I can't draw a straight line. And I always say, good, because we're not going to draw any straight lines. This exercise is not about straight lines. It's about creativity, not geometry. You see people leave a 1-hour session like that, so energized, so thrilled, so happy. And then you walk throughout the building, throughout the office, and you see people have taped them up in the corridors and the walls and in the lunchroom, and you realize you've changed the culture. Sometimes that's all I have to do to get a project back on track or get a project going. You reinvent a project, re-energize a project, and those are the basics. So I'm pretty certain we should be teaching them.
And I dare say perhaps as much adults as a focus, and also the children as they are, because these days, as you've rightly mentioned, a lot of screen time captures you during the day. Literally, you're sitting in there captured by various forms of screens, and your children are imitating you as well on that ground. And it's not ideal. To your point, you need to bring and infuse that passion, that energy in them by just getting them more reasons to develop their creativity, by even putting those 8 different colors in front of them, so that they can rediscover themselves, and the time that they can put into just literally the focus on themselves and the drawing that they can make, so the encounter with the unknown, as opposed to waiting what, on the other hand side, AI or some other tool online might tell you, because the conversation with yourself can be as empowering and important, not only what you can hear back just literally by typing a prompt, isn't it? So
exactly.
I love that.
Well, another thing I do is origami, and I'm known for handing total strangers, as I make my way through airports and through any community around the world, a little origami heart. And the reactions are always precious. Some people are just stupefied, and they, why did you give me this? And I say, well, bless your heart. I think you look like someone who deserves a heart today. But you see the power of such a small creative gesture. I remember a couple of years ago when Heathrow was having terrible problems. Talk about the failure of design and engineering. It was just dreadful. You saw people screaming at staff, and staff in tears, and people with lost luggage, and no swimsuits for their holiday, and people were just having meltdowns left and right. And I went to the counter to check in for my flight, And the poor woman, you could see, was shaking, just had obviously had a horrible day. And I reached into my pocket and I reached over the counter and I placed a little red origami heart in her hand. She came round the corner in full tears now and hugged me and just said, Dr. Moore, I was determined to quit today. I had had enough. I was just going to leave a job that I had loved, but it's gotten to be so bad these days. And you've just told me, no, I'm staying. And I thought, well, that's why I was meant to be here. But to remind someone, to be kind to someone, that's why the talent of just smiling at a stranger and saying hello, it confuses them because they're like, I don't know you. The younger the person, the more confused they are when I take my walk and I say hello.
And that's sad, isn't it? That they're kind of losing that touch of just welcoming a good gesture, which in your case, amazing gesture.
Well, on St. Patty's Day, being very Irish, I hand out 4-leaf clovers, little shamrocks that I fold. And I remember there was a fellow in my neighborhood, I handed it to him and I said how adorable I thought his dog was. And he started reaching in his pocket to get money to pay me for the shamrock I just handed him. And I thought, oh, these poor kids. And I said, no, honey, it's a gift. Really? Why?
We're not accustomed to receiving gifts.
Have we really gone that far? Yes, sadly. That's why I think we've got to, make the pendulum go back because we've lost our way.
And that's such a sad occurrence. And in fact, if anything, it seems that what you're saying to me, it's quite a lesson on empathy in itself, because you're basically showing that we still can give gifts to one another, and this shouldn't be judged as a part of the experience. It should in fact be welcome. And as part of that, do you think in the world at the moment, as we stand and with where we're going and the absolutely unseen before type of changes and the speed of these changes that we're experiencing at the moment, do you think there's room for more empathy, or are we just getting about to just, stumble upon the remainers of what's been there?
No, I think sadly, empathy, especially here in the States, with the current administration, we're not allowed to talk about equity, inclusivity, diversity. So I've had to go back to original terminology. I don't say inclusive design anymore. I say universal design. I go back to the starting point. And I still sneak in empathy, but I do it in such a way as to say, you have every right to expect the house of your dreams, the job you want, the car you need for you, your friends, your family. So I make it all about them. I make it focused on them. And some might say, well, that's so sad that we've got to be that kind of narcissistic. But no, I think it just means that some people don't see themselves in those messages of equity and inclusion. They think that we're saying someone else deserves their job, their house, and it's created this huge schism and this them and us polarity, which is very divisive, very dangerous, and design has got to step in and be the corrective action. So our words are essential. We have to frame what we need to say in such a way as to not make anyone feel we're talking about someone else, but rather we're talking about you and how very important you are. And just like your mother said, you are the center of the universe. And as hard as it is for me to sit in some boardrooms with some people and say that to their face, I've got to sell it in order for them to make jam jars that someone with one hand or arthritis can open. So this is how it's done. And that's the skill set that young designers need today.
I love that thinking because, as you said yourself, it allows to differentiate and place the focus back on yourself. And in fact, it reminds me here, my little one, he's now 8. And the other day he said, oh, mommy, you're the second favorite person of mine. And I'm like, okay, that's good to hear. And who's the first one? He's like, oh, it's me.
Well, that's healthy.
Not necessarily.
That's very healthy, especially for a child of 8, because sadly, as we see with so much suicide all over the world, with very young children now taking their own lives because of something they heard or someone said to them, oh, you should kill yourself. We have so many episodes of that in the States, especially where little ones have listened to friends who told them you're not worthy, you should kill yourself. So for a child of 8 to have a self-concept that's that healthy, you're a good mommy. I knew you were, but now I know for sure.
Thank you so much. My heart literally is just pumping up even more. But thank you for this. And now looking into the empathy elements and how you've started, and also your atmosphere, what you've experienced in a joint framework when you were surrounded by the lovely elderly ladies in your earlier days. Would love to focus on the lessons of gerontology and how you've brought about the design element and how you've linked them up together with gerontologists. So given that you're both a designer and a gerontologist, what have you learned, do you think, from gerontology that designers often overlook these days? What do you think is some of the key elements?
Well, again, I think sadly, a lot of us of all professions have learned that, oh, when you get older, you're about less and fragility and loss. And that couldn't be further from the truth. That is not, a linear path that happens to all people. And now, of course, we know this. On the social science and medical side of aging, I've learned this both in medical school and I did my graduate studies in gerontology at Columbia University in psychology. And you understand people are able to do in their lives whatever they can if they have the right toolkit. So you have to have appropriate housing, you have to have appropriate furnishings, you have to have enough money to eat properly, you have to have physical wherewithal to prepare a meal and do the washing up. All these things are about design.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, oh, well, it depends on income level. Yeah, but it still boils down to the cornerstone is design. And inappropriate design does not support autonomy and independence. And so I'm able to tell students the reason I deliberately went back to medical school and studied gerontology was so that the coin of my creativity has two sides. One is design, the other is health science and gerontology and psychology. I remember a dear friend, Tucker V. Meister, who's named for the Tucker car, brilliant designer, very good friend. When I told him I was going to med school, he got very concerned and he said, don't you want to be a designer anymore? And I had to remind him, no, Tucker, I'm going to be a really good designer because I'm going to understand all about physiology and how the body works and, the diseases like arthritis or dementias. I'm deliberately learning about those to see how do they impact architecture, design, and engineering. And we're now living in that time, which is also why I'll segue into AI. I'm not frightened by AI, but I'm concerned. We have to use it as the technical tool it's meant to be, and not something we put on TikTok and Facebook and try and fool people that, somebody's saying something and that's not them at all. So the childish behaviors that are going on at this first stage of utilization of AI, I'm concerned about it, but I'm not terrified by it. Sadly, these are the people that we just have to manage a little better. The fact that I just had my gallbladder removed several months ago by a robot was thrilling to me. But I also was aware that I had a brilliant young surgeon, a lovely woman, who was utilizing medical tools that gave me a much higher rate of success, percentage of success, than what would have been the surgeries my parents both had, which required long healing periods and gave them lots of grief post-surgically. I was up and around in 2 days with no troubles, very little scarring. Just amazing things, and how we train surgeons today, thanks to AI and all this high technology, which is wonderful. So that's when I tell people, no, calm down and realize you have to work with the tool. And then I remind them to go back, and if they haven't seen Star Trek Next Generation, Captain Picard, I mean, really. So just watch all those old episodes.
I'm a big fan, by the way.
Yes, of course. But I mean, Mr. Data, he's this human robot, and the whole ship is run by AI and technology. And of course, that's exactly what we're working on today. We're not going to Mars without all of this intervention. So I'm not at all afraid about it. I am mindful that lazy clients are going to allow AI to, do their branding or make the package for their product. And that might mean a graphic designer or a package designer is not going to have a chance to do that job. But we still need those people. This is going to be a very minor number of jobs will be lost in that regard. And then I also like to remind people one of the reasons President John F. Kennedy is remembered without glowing terms is the city of Danbury, Connecticut, almost overnight lost their main industry after his inauguration.
Yep.
He was the first president not to wear a top hat for his inauguration because he had such gorgeous hair and he didn't want hat hair. And so he didn't wear the hat. This is a true story. And haberdashers all but disappeared in the United States overnight. Now, of course, what gentleman doesn't look better in a hat? So, do we still see men wearing hats, gentlemen especially? Yes, of course. But it did change where men, and after the 60s, just didn't wear hats. And, the pendulum has swung too far in my estimation, people going into work, dressed as if they're about to wash the car. I'm not a big fan of that. That said, you have to be ready for change. And sadly, some industries will go away as we continue to evolve. What's important goes back to the education question. We have to be looking always for new jobs and opportunities for those people. I come from a steel city. I was born in Buffalo, New York. Very industrial city that no longer is an industrial city. The 3 steel mills there closed. The car, it was a stamping plant, I'm not even sure what that means, for Chevrolet closed. The granaries closed. And what was replaced was white collar industries. And Buffalo is booming. Buffalo didn't have any of the financial troubles of the last 20 years. Housing costs didn't fall. All these other things happened because they were ready with new jobs for the same workers. It just means you have to retrain.
So it's a rebalancing act in the mix, literally, where the route is going.
And that's all about design. All of that has to be a grand design plan for a company.
See, we've touched base on quite a few points here that I would be quite inspired to drill into at least 3 other questions that were not put on the list of questions, if anything.
I'm happy to talk about anything.
But you've inspired me to ask one in particular that I'm, in one way, from one perspective, I'm quite concerned about. I can see the opportunities, definitely. So to your analogy and the fact that you mentioned the level of precision that AI adds on when it comes to, for instance, surgeries, definitely the benefit is there. It's more of a question that I would have to ask regarding the cost to pay. Is it worth it overall in terms of, what else does it bring? And by that, what I mean is most recent advances in AI, whereby, for instance, the voice cloning, whereby, it can, on the back of a few seconds of hearing your voice or recording of your voice, it can generate an entire myriad of content just based on what it would claim is being said by you, when in fact it's AI. And we've seen that already being used in advertising at scale. And that's concerning me because you can hear a celebrity voice, right, which has been cloned, but it's being used for some trivial content such as, cooking dishes or whatever else, something that that celebrity would absolutely not associate herself with. So it's a few type of advances that come with something that we couldn't prior do at all, but it also is the manipulation of that element that needs to be ensured with an element of ethical prism, and also security, as you said, safe and security elements to the welfare of us citizens. Do you think the design element has a role to play in terms of safeguarding of how this is unfolding?
Oh, most definitely. I I have to make an admission. My office has been virtual since 2000, and at the time, one of the editors of Business Week magazine, a dear friend in New York, said, "Patty, no, it's too soon. You're going to you're going to kill your firm." Nothing of the sort happened. Clients love the fact that I was honestly telling them, no, I don't have everyone in the same space in my office in New York or my office in Phoenix. They're working all around the world. And thanks to all this technology we have, even though I hate Zoom calls, look at the nice conversation we get to have because of this technology. And so he was very wrong. And he told me within the year, I can't believe I was this wrong. So you saw more and more people closing down offices and allowing people to work from home or work wherever they needed to work. And in a lot of ways that prepared us, I think, for what happened in COVID, where we weren't able to go to work. Now, of course, getting people back into the office is a very difficult thing, so that pendulum, it gets quite ridiculous from time to time. But that said, I think the real opportunities come with realizing appropriate technologies make sense. So again, an admission that most people are just can't believe it's true. I've never had a website. So when I meet someone at a conference and say, "Oh, I was looking at this really neat project on your website," and I'm always torn between saying, what website were you looking at? Because, and then I wait to hear that it was such a beautiful project. And I think, oh, I know who they're talking about. They're talking about Patricia Moore, who's a brilliant interior designer here in the States. And she does wonderful things. And sometimes I say, well, thank you. And then I've got to rush because I'm late. Or I'll stop and say, no, that's not me. And people cannot believe that I don't have a website, and that I don't use TikTok, and I'm not on Instagram, and I'm not on Facebook. My agent thinks it's hilarious because he agreed with me. He said, no, you don't need any of this. If anything, I'm amazed that people find me. I've never been busier than I am. Again, I'll be 73 next month. I'm so busy, and people just find me. So if they really want to work with you, they're going to find you. Now, I'm not saying to young students, follow what I did. It's very dangerous in today's era. But because I was a known entity, people knew how to find me. They'd ring my management, my agent, my lawyers, whatever, and they would find me. And that's been a really good culling process for me, because only people who are really serious bother to find me. And I'm delighted by that. There was a piece in Wired magazine a couple of years ago, and I won't name the company, very large company, global company. And the CEO went into his assistant and said, "Get me Patty Moore." This lovely woman rang the office and was speaking to my personal assistant, Beth, and I could hear the conversation one-sided. And then I took the call, and she said, he wants to send the jet for you and have you come and speak to us. And I said, well, what does he want me to do? And he said, he wants you to teach us about empathy. Well, I was a puddle. I know I burst into tears because I was so touched to think that this brilliant young CEO wanted to make sure his company was empathetic. And then it made me feel like, well, maybe my career hasn't been a waste. I was just so touched by that.
Absolutely, Potter. If anything, that's to me a testament to the fact that you've built your brand and it has lasted so much so that younger people. Of course, I can see the need, if anything, to differentiate yourself as a brand. You need to build those profiles because that's the rule. That's the name of the game these days for to be able to shine through if needs be. But for someone like yourself, who's built up that brand long time ago, and with that much weight, it persisted over, and it will still be there, right? So you've left that heritage. Do you think, on that note, talking about heritage and the fact that now the younger CEOs of bigger brands are interested in infusing empathy amongst their people, amongst their team members, what do we need to teach younger people in such a way that they become your worthy warriors to take that word onward, because you were a warrior yourself in that ground, right, as a gerontologist as well, thinking of others. So how can we teach them, to think about the others too?
Well, that's a wonderful question. It's a topic. I hadn't thought of this in a long while, but when I was trained in the 70s, in the early 70s, I graduated from undergrad in industrial design in 74. We were being taught to design for consumers. I was adamant that that was backwards, that we should design with consumers. And I was one of the earliest when I started my own firm in 1982. I insisted with new clients that they realize we were going to have a team of actual consumers, key consumers for the project at hand, who would advise us throughout the entire project. And some companies' lawyers were very anxious about that because they felt it was making promises to consumers that they could be sued for down the road. And I didn't really care. I would go to my grandfather's favorite comment, and I hope it's not too crude. I don't give a rat's patootie about the lawyers. I'm just worried about my people like my grandfather. So I've been adamant about that. And my favorite story, if I may, was my very first client. I won't name them, but again, a huge multinational. And they were a lovely company doing a great deal of good in healthcare, but it was mostly in hospital. And so when you have someone post-surgically who can't get up from the bed to use the toilet, you have those miserable pans you have to use and things. But they made a collection device that you would wear, and you could urinate and defecate into this device. And then the nursing staff had an easier time of keeping you clean and the bed clean. No one wants to talk about the lack of continence, but that is a huge need. It's a human need. We all have it. There isn't a single human.
We all will go through it.
Yes. There's a lovely little book I offer everyone. Go to Amazon and buy this book today. It's called Everybody Poops. It's a great children's book. And it's the great equalizer. It's an important life story lesson. Anyhow, I was hired by this company because they wanted to make it a consumer product, and they knew that was a big ask. This was going to be a very difficult thing to achieve. And so I went to the first meeting. I was the only broad in the room. I actually had an engineer say, "Who's the broad?" It's like, oh my goodness, the stories I could tell. We were chatting all morning, and I'm drinking coffee. And on cue, the client, who is also one of my friends at the other end of the table, said to me, "So Patty, you've been listening to the scientists and the material science, everyone. What do you think?" And I stood up and I looked behind this side and I looked behind that side, and I said, "Well, it appears to work." And you saw revulsion go around the table like one of those waves at a football match, where everybody stands up. And you saw them realize, oh my goodness, she's wet herself. and you saw some people wanted me taken out of the building by security, and other people were laughing, so you had the full breadth of human
bravery.
Well, I was not very popular after the coffee break because the men were led away into the men's facilities, and they were all given a prototype to put on, as I had done. And they came walking back into the room because, men aren't accustomed to what we women have the advantage of, menstrual care. We were used to wearing all sorts of things over the course of our needs. And they were walking like little Michelin men, little marshmallow men with their legs separated and, so uncomfortable. But it made my point immediately, which was even before I came to the meeting, I knew what we had to do was scale down the profile of the product. It was just too big. It was a necessity in a hospital bed, but a consumer who wants to go about their daily lives and not have anyone recognize there's something under their clothing. Like I can appreciate our police officers wearing vests for protection from bullets and things, but you don't want the general public to know you're wearing something like that. It's sort of the Spanx philosophy, but we didn't have Spanx yet. If you didn't want the clothing line to show. And that totally scaled down the product overnight. And again, I won't name the company, but they became the leader. They're still the leader in this field globally. Very successful product. And now, of course, what we've seen is beyond this more like a menstrual care product, continent care product, we now have undergarments that are washable. And that's what we wanted the evolution to be. And that's design. That's not science. That's design pushing all of it.
Magic, isn't it? Like thinking like that.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I say to all my lady friends, in this day and age when your plane is stuck on the tarmac and, and the toilets are closed because we've been on the ground for 3 hours, I sit there happily in my washable undergarment because I don't need to use the toilet. If there's a human need, I've got it covered because I'm wearing a product that's going to work. And that's what we want design to do.
That's what intuitive design is to me as well.
Exactly so.
By the capital I, because
Exactly
definitely.
Well, without intuition, we can't have innovation. That's another coin. Those are the two sides of that coin. And, the coin of commerce is definitely choice. The other side is control. If you don't have choices in life as a consumer, you can't have control over the quality of your life. And, these are the things I just hope I get to teach as many students as possible before I leave, and they just carry on.
I'm just resentful of the fact that I'm not one of your students in that sense, because I'd love to hear all of these beautiful stories you have to tell and, the learnings that you've accumulated over the years. And talking about that, actually, and I know that sadly we're approaching the final of the interview, but we've got a tradition again on a podcast and talking about the learnings and, what you've accumulated and trying to tap into your vision as well. We have a short and flash Q&A, which would be a short question asked and a short answer given, so that we can try and figure out how do you feel about certain things. For instance, shall we drum roll?
Okay.
Yay, excellent. So the first one, please. A product you wish you had designed.
Oh, trees. I wish I was the creator of trees. I think they're the most perfect product. They give us oxygen, they give us delight, they give us homes for birds. And if not trees, champagne.
I love that. I love that. But in terms of the type of products that we don't yet have, but you wish that we could have, if you have a hint into what's needed.
I know it's not going to happen in my lifetime, but we must hurry to make Mr. Data. And every household on the planet that has a single dweller should have a Mr. Data. We need to have robots with us to help us do daily tasks, keep us company, converse with us, fill the void, the socialization that's required. and it's not happening fast enough. I'm really surprised by that. I thought we'd be further along. Those little robot dogs scared the bejesus out of me. One of those was in my
Yes,
house.
it will look very attractive at the
No, no,
moment.
no, no. Sony was much closer to what we wanted in the 90s with Aibo. It was a lovely little robot dog, and it's off the market now, which is a shame. I'm constantly urging them to bring it back.
On that ground, do you feel that this type of an innovation, would it not make us lazier? Would it bring that element along, or will it be a separation of activities?
No, we were certain with some of the research we've actually done in skilled nursing centers where someone is so isolated and depressed that they won't leave their bed, they won't change from bed clothes to, street clothes and go down to the lunchroom or, go to the card room or the TV room or just, leave their room. When we give them robotic, toys, suddenly they're made to come out of the bed and get dressed again and show off their little robot to the other residents. And so we're fairly confident if we had a robot. Now, mind you, I have a high standard for robots. Mine has got to look like Cary Grant. So Cary and I will have a lovely time, but unfortunately, I don't see it happening in time for me.
I understand where you're coming from, Patty. The next one, please. What inspires you most about older generations?
Their resilience.
Fair enough. And the wisdom that comes along, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right. Next one, please. What's more powerful, empathy or innovation?
Empathy. Always empathy. Empathy delivers innovation. Without empathy, there's no innovation.
Thank you. I love that answer. And the last one. Do you think there's one question that we haven't tackled, but you'd absolutely love to answer on?
Well, I think maybe asking me if I had one project left to create, what would it be? I know the answer because I think of it daily. I think of it the moment I open my eyes to BBC World News at 6 a.m. every morning and hear the headlines and things that happened while I slept. I wish I could design peace.
If that would stand in our power, would it?
And I think in some small way we do that. We do that with kindnesses. We do it with smiles. We do it with giving a damn and helping others, helping strangers, being kind to strangers, going out of our way to be nice. It's little things. It's baby steps. It doesn't have to be grandiose. I love when I've had an interaction with someone at the market, because I love chatting with people. And not only will I chat with the person checking me out, but the lady behind me. And then as I'm wandering off, I often hear that woman that is up next with the checker saying, "Wasn't she nice?" And
That's compliment.
if I leave the world with that on my headstone, I feel I've done a good job.
Patty, you've brought not only light to this conversation, but also a lot of great energy. I'm so very grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
I'm honored, Nadia. I hope we do it again soon.